let's talk about the Terence Crawford, Errol Spence topic. And for those that don't know what I'm talking about, because it hasn't really been written about in articles, it's sort of been hidden away on the PBC podcast. And again, Kenneth over there on the PBC podcast, you're doing great work. I would say my only slight criticism is the audio quality, but that's a small criticism. I think you're finding some gems there, I gotta say. And Tim Smith was on, and he has some gems to say, including saying that the Terence Crawford-Errol Spence fight is kind of not close to happening at all, mainly due to there's no budget really for the fight, and it's not like the fight's not really calling for it for pay-per-view. And let's hear his words on why that is.
We're not paying attention to. What do you think?
Now, let me ask you this. Are promotional issues holding back Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder?
No.
Okay, you just answered your question. So
what is it?
That is one of the biggest fallacies in the world. Think about this. If you want to pay these guys at the level that they want to get paid, how big of a name must they have? If both of these guys want to make $10 million off of a fight, you can't just pay them $10 million and put it on Fox or Showtime or whatever. It's got to go on pay-per-view.
Right.
So what better way to build this into a
saying the pot isn't big enough? Or?
There is no pot. Where's the pot? Where are you going to get $20 million for that fight? I mean, who's going to pay $20 million? Who's going to pay a $20 million license fee for that fight?
Who's going to pay a $20 million license fee for that fight? I think it's interesting that we're now hearing sort of a number from an official representative from PBC and or Top Rank talking about this fight and adding a number attached to it. That's interesting. We're going to play a little bit more of it. It's actually a long clip. I may try to play as much of it as I feel like it's appropriate to play. But it's interesting, and it gets more interesting as it goes, let's say.
I mean, who's going to pay that?
Right.
I mean, that's a big number even for big spenders, because you're not going to get a return on that of that magnitude. But let's say you let both of these guys build themselves into a superstar. Let's say you let one guy become a unified champion, and then they end up, fighting for the undisputed welterweight championship of the world. How big is that fight if both of those guys are well known? Everybody knows who they are, and it's this year's, and it's legitimately, Hearns and Leonard, legitimately, when Hearns and Leonard were both well known, stars in their own right. But neither one of these guys have developed themselves into that kind of superstardom yet. Not even on one side has it been developed. I mean, we're working on getting Errol Spence to that level. And Errol's probably got a stronger resume at 147 pounds, but the other guy doesn't have that strong of a resume at 147 pounds yet. Right. Let's see him get to 147 pounds. Let's see him get, a nice resume and build himself into the kind of star that would, make it into a mega event.
Sure.
That would be fun, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be a fun event if, both these guys were known and they were just, at the level of,
No, I'll stop it there because I have some more I can play, but I'll just stop it there because I feel like we got the gist of it. Now, according to PBC/Tim Smith, the reason the fight is not getting made is because there's no pot big enough. There's no license fee right now big enough for the fight. Quote, $20 million, $10 million each. I will say that maybe you can shop out the fight to people and see if that's true, because I don't know if that's the case. I could see DAZN paying out a big lump sum to get both fighters on that network. And yeah, DAZN's probably going to lose money doing that, of course, but there's possibly money to be had out there. Hell, if you guys are going to Saudi Arabia and having fights and you don't care about the morals, there's money to be had somewhere to make the fight at this point in time. So let's just be honest about it. Now, on whether or not this fight would sell or be marketable enough to earn back revenue and all that fun stuff. First off, they made Spence Garcia, and at the time you were hearing they were getting paid somewhere around like 7 to 8 million, if not more, for that. So it's entirely possible that with a Spence Mikey fight, and hell, we're about to get Spence Porter on pay-per-view, right? We don't know how much they're going to be making, but it's feasible to make those fights. And let's all be honest here. Mikey Garcia and Sean Porter aren't the level of a draw as Terence Crawford is, both in terms of ticket sales and in TV ratings. Just not the case. And on top of that, at least Terence Crawford may not have a great history on pay-per-view, at least has a history on pay-per-view. Mikey didn't, Sean doesn't, and yet those two fights are acceptable for Errol Spence in this time, and they make monetary sense to put those on pay-per-view, but not Terence Crawford. Why? Because Terence Crawford hasn't done anything in the weight class. Mikey wasn't even in the weight class. Okay, Mikey never even fought at the weight class, period. Terence Crawford's a belt holder. Terence Crawford has wins over top 5, top 10 names in this division. So the idea, or at least to have the audacity to say, like, Terence Crawford hasn't done anything, he has to come up to 147, has to do something at 147, it's just so old now. It's so tired at this point, that line. Now, to sort of table that aspect of the discussion, taking it back to the monetary point, I think it is entirely possible that Tim Smith could be honest when he says, look, both guys, in theory, want a lot for this fight, and we kind of just don't think it makes sense right now. Like, they won't get paid a lot. We know if we make it on pay-per-view, at tops, we're going to do 500,000 buys. And while that is successful, it's not going to make back the money on this type of fight. And while we may be okay eating out, or I should say eating a check on a Pacquiao fight or a Wilder fight, we're not necessarily there yet on a Spence Crawford fight. I can understand maybe him saying that, and he is saying that, but there's another point in this interview, which I won't play, but they talk about you always asked about the article that was written, I think, by the LA Times by some guy about how boxing's dead, and Tim Smith goes, "Look, boxing's doing great. Like, everyone's doing great. Everyone's working together. Everyone's having a good time. Like, blah 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 blah." And then he goes in, "No, we can't do this." And now he says it's not a promotional issue, and that's obviously might be the truth. It might just be a money issue, but it doesn't add up because, again, the numbers we heard for Mikey Spence fight were comparable to the $10 million each for Crawford Spence. It was. And Crawford Spence is a bigger fight. It is. May not be a significantly bigger fight, but it is a bigger fight. So you can't be out there making Spence versus lightweights on pay-per-view when those lightweights, A, aren't welterweights, and B, aren't as big of names as welterweight champions, and then you say that welterweight champion needs to do something at the weight class and they need to get their brand up. It's just contradictory. It just is, point blank. I am curious to see if anyone can get to Bob Arum, because I don't have his number, but if anyone can get to Bob Arum and ask him about, hey, Tim Smith of PBC said that Spence Crawford fight's a $20 million fight. Could you guys get a license fee for that? Could you guys make that on pay-per-view and make those deals possible? Just ask questions. Like, the media needs to start doing a little bit more, being a little more proactive with goading this fight and to be made, because I don't think the promoters are in any sense going to make it at this point in time. moving on.